In this city, you learn early that shadows have memories. I spent 6 years chasing those shadows, always 2 steps behind a man who seemed to command the darkness itself. His name was Victor Cain, the most feared and respected private investigator in the city. To everyone else, Victor was a legend, a man who could find a needle in a haystack and tell you exactly who had dropped it there. To me, he was everything. I was Alex Monroe, an eager young investigator with something to prove and nowhere to start. 6 years earlier, Victor had taken me under his wing when nobody else would give me a chance. He taught me everything: how to follow someone without being seen, how to survive a 12-hour stakeout without losing focus, how to read a crime scene, how to spot a lie before the liar even finished speaking, and how to understand that the smallest detail could destroy the biggest alibi. For 6 years, I was his apprentice, his partner, and eventually his right hand. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. Because the problem with learning from a master of deception is that eventually you have to ask yourself one terrifying question: when did the lesson end and the lie begin? It started on a Tuesday. Victor didn't come to the office that morning. That wasn't completely unusual. He sometimes disappeared for hours while following a lead, but that day felt different. His desk was untouched, his coffee was cold, and his phone was nowhere to be found. Then came the knock on the door. I opened it and found Evelyn Sterling standing outside. Everyone in the city knew her name. She was a wealthy socialite surrounded by old money, expensive parties, and secrets that never reached the newspapers. But that morning she looked terrified. She wore a black silk dress and clutched her handbag so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Mr. Monroe," she said, "I need your help." She told me about the Star of the North, a diamond necklace so valuable that its insurance alone was worth more than our entire office. It had disappeared during a private gala at her mansion, and there was something worse. Victor had been hired to protect it. Now the necklace was gone, and so was Victor. I immediately defended my mentor. "There has to be an explanation," I told her. "Victor wouldn't steal from a client." Evelyn stared at me for several seconds before quietly saying, "Mr. Monroe, Victor was the last person seen near the vault." For a moment I couldn't speak. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, but something inside me had already started connecting the dots. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken lock, no damaged door, and no evidence of a struggle. I went to the Sterling mansion and examined the vault. Whoever had taken the necklace hadn't broken in. They had simply walked in. I examined the security footage and saw Victor entering the vault corridor shortly before the necklace disappeared. Then the cameras went dark for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes, not 6, not 8, 7. The same length of time Victor had once told me was enough to disappear from almost any security system in the city. At the time, I'd thought he was teaching me a useful trick. Now I wondered if he'd been teaching me about himself. I returned to our office and searched Victor's desk. For 6 years I'd respected that desk like it was sacred. That day I stopped caring about boundaries. I searched every drawer, every file, and every cabinet, but found nothing. Then I remembered something Victor had once told me: criminals always hide important things in places they believe nobody will ever look. I checked beneath his desk and noticed that one of the floorboards was loose. I pried it up and discovered a small metal box hidden underneath. Inside were two things: a burner phone and a black leather ledger. I opened the ledger, and at first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the names: criminal fixers, smugglers, corrupt businessmen, and people Victor had supposedly spent years helping the police investigate. Beside each name were dates and amounts of money. My hands began to shake. I turned another page, then another, and the truth became impossible to ignore. Victor hadn't simply been investigating criminals, he had been working with them. He had been selling information, planting false evidence, manipulating investigations, and getting paid to make certain criminals disappear from the system. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. My own name was written across page after page. The ledger contained details of cases I'd worked on, the surveillance I'd conducted, the documents I'd filed, and the people I'd followed. I suddenly realized what Victor had really been doing. He hadn't been training me to become his successor, he had been training me to become his shield. Every dangerous assignment I'd taken, every questionable document I'd prepared, and every piece of evidence I'd handled had been part of a plan. Victor had been creating the perfect fall guy. If the truth ever came out, Victor could disappear. And I'd be left behind to take the blame. I felt sick. 6 years of memories suddenly looked different. The late night coffees, the praise, the advice, and the moments when Victor had called me his best student all felt like pieces of one enormous lie. Then I noticed something else in the ledger. Had any of it been real? A final entry contained a location, the old city clock tower. Beside it was a time, 11:30 p.m. Victor had always loved that tower. He used to say the grinding gears made the perfect cover for private conversations. Suddenly, I knew where he was going, and I knew what he was planning. He wasn't running yet. He was waiting for someone, probably the buyer. I could have called the police immediately, but I wanted to see him. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man I had trusted for 6 years and hear him explain why. Before leaving, however, I made one anonymous call to the police and gave them the location. Then I headed toward the clock tower. Rain hammered the streets as I walked through the city. Neon signs reflected across the flooded pavement, and the wind pushed cold water against my face. I climbed the narrow staircase in darkness, every step echoing through the tower. The clock tower rose above the buildings like a giant stone skeleton. My hand stayed close to my weapon as I climbed higher and higher. When I finally reached the observation deck, I saw him. Victor stood beside the enormous glass face of the clock, staring down at the city. He didn't turn around when I stepped onto the platform. "I knew you'd come," he said calmly. I stopped several feet behind him. "You knew?" I asked. Victor smiled. "Alex, I taught you how to follow people. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when my best student started following me?" I stepped closer. "Where's the necklace?" Victor reached into his coat. For a second, I thought he was drawing his weapon. Instead, he pulled out the Star of the North. The diamonds caught the moonlight and scattered brilliant reflections across the glass. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. I stared at him. "You betrayed everyone." Victor shook his head. "No, I understood everyone." He turned toward me and continued. "This city doesn't reward loyalty, Alex. It rewards whoever is smart enough to take what they want." I felt anger rising inside me. "You used me." Victor smiled. "I educated you. You made me your accomplice." His expression didn't change, "only because you were good enough to be one." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked at the man who had once been a father figure to me and felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not fear, just clarity. "You know what the difference is between us?" I asked. Victor raised an eyebrow. "I learned everything you taught me," I said. "But you forgot to teach me how to become you." For the first time, his smile disappeared. He moved quickly. His hand went toward his weapon, but I reacted before he could draw it. We crashed into each other, and the clock tower filled with the sound of fists, footsteps, and grinding machinery. Victor was stronger, faster, and more experienced, but I knew his habits. I knew how he shifted his weight before attacking. I knew which hand he favored. I knew how he reacted when someone grabbed his wrist because he had taught me those techniques himself. He swung at me, but I blocked the attack. He tried to break free, but I twisted his arm and drove him against the glass. The Star of the North slipped from his coat and landed on the floor. Victor struggled, but I held him down. Then the sound of sirens rose from the streets below. Red and blue lights flashed across the windows. Victor looked toward the street and finally understood. "You called them," he said. I nodded. "Before I came here." For the first time in 6 years, I saw fear in Victor Cain's eyes. Moments later, police officers stormed into the tower. They found the necklace, the ledger, the burner phone, and enough evidence to destroy Victor's entire criminal network. As the officers placed handcuffs around his wrists, Victor looked back at me. There was something strange in his expression. It wasn't anger or hatred, it was pride. "You were always my best student," he said. I stared at him and shook my head. No, Victor, I was your last mistake. The officers led him away, leaving me alone in the tower. I stood there for a long time, listening to the endless ticking of the clock and watching the city glow through the rain. The Star of the North had been recovered. The evidence was secured. The case was over, but I didn't feel victorious. I'd spent 6 years believing I was learning from a hero. Instead, I'd been learning from the villain, and perhaps that was the most important lesson Victor had ever taught me. In a world built on deception, the most dangerous person isn't always the stranger standing in the shadows. Sometimes it's the person standing beside you, the person who knows your weaknesses, the person who taught you everything you know. I walked out of the clock tower that night as Alex Monroe, the apprentice, but I never returned to the office. I was no longer Victor Cain's shadow. I was a detective, and for the first time in my life, I was walking alone. Thanks for listening to this story of betrayal, deception, and justice. If you enjoyed the mystery, subscribe for more detective stories, unexpected twists, and cases where nothing is ever quite what it seems. Until next time, keep your eyes open.